Vice Mayor, members of the council, I'm Chris Tatham with ETC Institute. It's a pleasure to be back. I was here about a year ago to give you an update on what your residents think about the quality of city service delivery. If you're not familiar with our firm specializes in doing community surveys for city and county governments across the country. During just the past 6 or 7 years, we've surveyed over 1.5 million people in more than 600 cities. So as I go through the presentation today, I'm going to talk about some things in context of what we see going on elsewhere in the country. The good news is the results for Oklahoma City are very positive. Just in light of what the Vice Mayor said, you have a lot of good things going on in Oklahoma City. What I'm going to do today is kind of walk you through the purpose and methodology of the survey. I know you're already familiar with that, but just to recap that so you can kind of use this as a tool to balance the information that you get from many other sources. Most communities like Oklahoma City use this as a basis of getting objective input from the general public. You know, too often public processes are dominated by special interest groups, and sometimes it's difficult to really understand at the end of the day what are the needs of the average citizen out there and how well are you meeting those needs. So I commend the city for its commitment for doing this to really make sure that the average citizen on the streets' interests are represented in your decision-making processes. I'm going to give you our major findings up front, and I'm going to walk through how we got there, and certainly if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. As far as the purpose of the survey, I know you're all familiar with the fact that this is really designed to give you an objective assessment for how well you're delivering key city services. You've used it for a number of years to set priorities both in budget and also resource allocation, and also give you a sense to how you're doing over time. So I'll be able to show you some of the changes just from this year, from last year, so you can see how some of the decisions you've made have impacted the expectations that the public has for city services. As far as the methodology is concerned, this year's survey was done exactly the way previous surveys have been conducted. We administered the survey to a random sample of 1,200 households in the city. The results aren't perfect. They have an accuracy of about plus or minus 2.8% at the 95% level of confidence. And that just means if we did the survey 100 times, 95 times out of 100, we get these same results within about plus or minus 3%. So it's very good, but again, not perfect information. The survey is administered by mail and phone in both English and Spanish. And when you look at the demographic composition of the people who responded to the survey, it closely mirrors the demographic composition of the city's actual population. It also generally reflects the density of the city's population. This map just shows the location of where respondents live. So we feel very good about the sample, that when you look at the results, these results really do reflect what the average person in the community thinks about city services and priorities. With that said, these are the major conclusions for this year's survey. Bottom line is residents generally have a very positive perception of the city, and even more importantly, residents definitely think the city's moving in the right direction. Unlike most communities around the country, which are actually seeing their numbers decrease with regard to people's perceptions of where their cities are going, Oklahoma City is definitely moving in the right direction. You're doing a great job of equitably distributing services throughout the city, and you're setting the standard in a number of areas. And I'll show you where you really stack up favorably compared to other communities. And the overall indicators have improved. Many of the specific indicators have stayed about the same, but that's actually a favorable finding in this climate where nationally we've seen most of the ratings for city services dropping. Finally, is the big surprise, I guess it's not a surprise, but the top priority, maintenance continues to be that. But you'll see as we go through the results, your satisfaction level with maintenance have actually been sustained. And that actually surprised me. I drove around town yesterday and today, and you've got a lot of projects undergoing, which I think shows that you're responding to these concerns that residents have had. But usually when cities respond at a level that the cities responded, satisfaction typically goes down rather significantly during the construction phase. And the fact that your results have stayed about the same, I think is a very favorable finding. So with that, let me kind of walk through how we got to those findings. The first one is just the general perception that residents have of the city is very positive. And we have a number of key, what I call strategic indicators on the survey that are used to assess the health of communities, everything from the image, the quality of life, how well the city's planning for growth, perceptions of your downtown, and so forth. And you'll see that for all of the areas that were assessed on the survey, none of the areas have more than 20% dissatisfaction. You'll see feeling of safety actually has the most dissatisfaction, about 19%, so that's an area to continue watching. Is my understanding you're probably going to be adding more police and other things, but I think that's one of the areas in the survey that you at least want to pay attention to so it doesn't become an issue in the future. But overall, only 7% of the residents surveyed were dissatisfied with the overall quality of city services. That's the third item from the bottom. So anyone who complains about services, you know, there's a group out there that doesn't like how well you provide services, but for every one person that complains, you'll see that the positive percentages, the 14 and 52, there's 66% of the population, 2 out of 3, give you favorable ratings. So almost a 10-to-1 ratio of positives to negatives. So the city's doing very good in that regard. In addition, when it comes to how things have changed since last year, you'll see a number of areas have improved rather significantly. The overall satisfaction with city services increased 2%. You'll see there were significant improvements with regard to the appearance of the city's image, how well the city's planning for growth, and perceptions of downtown. All of those items improved by 3% or more. Quality of life also increased a little bit, but it wasn't a statistically significant improvement. Feeling of safety dropped 1%, which was not a significant decrease either. But in general, people feel better about living in the city this year than they did a year ago, which is a great finding, given that most people in most communities around the country feel the opposite way in other communities I visit. In addition, when it comes to the direction that the city is moving, one of the key indicators we ask on the survey is whether or not people think that this is a city that's moving in the right direction, and how they kind of rate your performance in that regard, whether it's excellent, good, or poor, or fairly, or very poor. You'll notice that it's highlighted on here that 43% of the residents surveyed gave excellent ratings for the direction the city is headed. Another 40% gave good, so a total of 83%. And that's high, but where it really stands out to me is the high percentage of people who are giving a 5 rating. In most communities, there's maybe 15 to 25% of residents give a rating of 5 as far as the direction of the community. People feel really passionately here about the direction the city's headed. Only 7% don't think the city's headed in the right direction, so you have over an 11-to-1 ratio of positives to negatives. So you're clearly doing some things right to make residents feel so strongly about the direction you are moving. In addition, when we took a look at how that has changed compared to a year ago, not only do the residents generally feel that this is a better place to work now than a year ago, you'll see that the percentage of residents who thought the city's moving in the right direction went from 76%, which was a high rating last year, getting 3 out of 4, to 83% this year. It's one of the most significant changes in the survey, and I really think that that's a leading indicator for what's to come. People think you're doing a lot of the right things now, and they'll pay dividends for you in the future. Next thing we looked at is just how well you stack up compared to other communities. And on these same indicators, you notice that these blue arrows pointing up show that you rate significantly above other large communities across the country when it comes to issues like, as people rate this as a place to live, as a place to raise children, as a place to work, all significantly better, even as a place to retire. When it comes to how well you're planning growth, phenomenal difference. The typical large community in the United States, only about 1 in 3 residents think that that government in that city is planning for growth well. It's almost 3 out of 4 here. So again, the way you're planning for the future, the things that are happening in this community, people are very positive about that. So you may get negative feedback about how you're planning, but the vast majority of residents think you're doing it right. In addition, you see the overall quality of city services. In most communities, fewer than half the residents in large cities think their local government does that well, at 46%. You'll see here in Oklahoma City, 2 out of 3 residents are 66%. So to be 20% above the national average is a significant accomplishment. It's not just you're not just doing a little bit better than most communities, you're doing much better than most communities, and you have a lot to be proud of when we look at these key indicators.
Chris, it seems like kind of a strange anomaly, though, on that last slide, that the overall quality of life in the city would be less than the national average.
Well, you know, overall quality of life is a function of a lot of things, not just city services. It comes into everything with, you know, people's pay levels, the entertainment available, and things like school districts. There's so many other factors that go into that. Ironically, there are some communities that get great quality of life ratings, and then their local government gets very poor ratings. And so I think your contribution to quality of life is certainly having a positive impact, given the fact that people feel very good about the local government, but the local government isn't the only thing that affects the quality of life. So I think you can feel good about the contribution the city is making to that issue.
Could I ask you a question on that same chart that Ms. Sawyer asked? on the how well the city is planning for growth part, do you probe that question about why people think we're doing well? What part of planning? Because I run into problems where it doesn't appear to me that we are doing a good job sometimes about planning, and I want to know why. I'd like to know why 7 out of 10 people think we're doing a great job.
On this survey, unfortunately, we don't. You know, part of this survey, it's kind of like getting a physical, a health checkup from your doctor. You have a lot of general tests, and if they find a problem, then you need to look at that a little more detail. Same sort of thing if you're really super healthy in an area, you might not know from that. So there may be some additional follow-up that may be done. You can do additional surveying or focus group, but unfortunately from this survey, we just know you're doing a really good job. We can't necessarily say why.
Well, what would we have to do to find the underlying reason for that? I have some personal ideas about why people think that we're doing a good job in growth, but it'd be nice to have those validated or exposed as.
It's possible in a future survey that we do, we could perhaps include some questions about elements of planning and see which one of those, and compare those to other communities. That's certainly one option. You know, today I probably couldn't give you a real definite answer, but that's certainly one way to possibly look at it or approach the issue.
Thanks.
The other thing we look at in this survey is generally how well you're delivering services across the city, especially in a city this large. One of the challenges is are you equitably providing services? I'm not going to go through all the maps. There's an extensive series of maps in your report, but one of the things that we're looking at particularly is just the overall indicator of overall how satisfied are residents with city services. And what I'm always looking for, do you have any areas in the city that get rated red or orange? In other words, that are just dissatisfied with the quality of service, and you don't have any. In fact, the entire city is almost in blue. You've got a couple places that are kind of giving more of a neutral rating, but for the most part, regardless of where you live in the city, people feel pretty good and about the same about the overall quality of city service delivery. While there are some differences for specific services, this is a real good indicator that overall you're doing a very good job of meeting the needs of people regardless of where they live. In a big city geographic like this, that's very difficult to do. The next thing we looked at are just some of the specific services. The overall indicators show improvement, but what we found on some of the specific services that were rated this year, that frankly, things have stayed about the same. And I think that shows that people believe you're on the right course, but some of the investments haven't been finished yet, and so you haven't necessarily seen the expectations met or changed at this point in time. There's a number of questions we ask on the survey. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights. These are the major categories of city services that were assessed. You can see fire, ambulance, police. I won't read the complete list to you, but as you come down to the bottom, you see maintenance of city streets is the one area where we have the highest level of dissatisfaction. And anytime you have twice as many people dissatisfied as you do satisfied, clearly that's a concern. That number hasn't changed dramatically, but I know that's one of the reasons that you've been investing heavily. It usually takes a few years, from my experience, to change those numbers around, but once your projects start getting completed, that's when you'll probably see the fact that you'll see expectations begin to be met. So the fact that people right now feel good about the direction of the city suggests that your investments are in the right areas, but at this point in time, they haven't seen their streets completed and there's a lot of construction going on. When we looked at how things have changed compared to, or actually how you stack up nationally, you'll notice customer service, and I think this is one of the things to kind of commend your employee base. Most communities, only about 4 out of 10 residents feel good about the customer service they get from a local government that's large like the city of Oklahoma City. Here you have 60%. It's a 17% difference. So clearly the culture here of your employees and the way they respond to citizen needs is setting the standard. You also see the way you communicate. You're 13 points above the national average in the way you communicate with residents. So hats off in those areas. You'll see water utility services trails a little bit behind. So does Parks and Recreation. But what's interesting about your Parks and Recreation is there's not a lot of dissatisfaction. These numbers are based on the percentage of people who give positive ratings, or 4 and 5s. When we look at your Parks and Recreation numbers, there's a lot of people who give like a neutral response, or a 3. In other words, they haven't had a real good experience, they haven't had a real bad experience. And one of the things I'm going to show you in a little bit is information is actually one of the issues that's rising to the surface. And what we found is the more people know about a good system, the more likely they are to go from a 3 to a 4. So you can change somebody who's kind of neutral with information and cause them to become a 4. You can't do that to somebody who's had a bad experience. So I think there's opportunities just with information and awareness for you to improve your Parks and Recreation ratings. And you can see the last one, maintenance of streets, you trail there 12 percentage points. And the real key area there, though, is major streets, which probably also is affected by your highway system and the interstates. When you look at neighborhood street ratings, you're actually on par with most other large communities. When it comes to the trends from last year, you'll notice that there were almost no changes in any of the areas that were assessed. In fact, you can see statistically, each of the areas in 2012 measured exactly the same way it did a year ago. Those slight deviations are really just a matter of a few tenths of a point. So you pretty much held your own over the last year. Most communities have seen decreases during the last year. So given the fact that it's a turbulent time for the nation, you've held on very well. When we looked at all of the areas that were assessed on the survey, this was probably the biggest surprise for me, is because I've never seen such stability in ratings. There are 77 areas that were rated. 63 of them essentially stayed the same. In other words, the change was positive to negative was less than 3%. We saw 7 areas increase by more than 3% and 7 decrease by more than 3%. These are the areas that had the biggest improvement, and hats off to the city for preventing snow last year. You can see that it had a big impact on people's perceptions of snow removal. That was up 8%, so whatever you did to make sure it didn't snow, keep on doing that. The fact that the direction the city's headed is up 7 points, that's really a leading indicator. That's usually what happens. People feel good about where you're going, and their expectations are likely to follow that in the future. You see image, appearance, how well you're planning for growth also improved significantly, and even the city's website saw a 4% boost in perceptions of its usability and its satisfaction with that. When it comes to areas that decreased, you can see that enforcing the mowing and trimming of grass on private property was down 4%. Condition of city street pavement markings was down. Much of that is probably a function of the fact you have a lot of construction going on. You can see rec centers, perceptions of response time for police officers, neighborhood street conditions, availability of parks and recreation information, and local ambulance service kind of round out the areas that we saw decreases. But for the most part, things were very, very stable this year. As far as where to invest or what the top issues are that will make a difference to residents over the next couple years, not a real surprise, it continues to be streets. But what's so pronounced here in Oklahoma City about the street issue is that more people pick it as a top choice than anything else combined top 3 choices. You'll see that 69%, the next issue, traffic flow police services, are a distant second. But you can see that there's growing concern, I shouldn't say concern, but a growing prioritization among a key group of people about the importance of police services. You'll see the percentage of people picking it as a top choice is actually the second most frequently #1 choice among the areas that were assessed. And given that there are some issues, subtle issues about safety, I think that's an area to at least pay attention to as you move forward. Streets, though, is clearly still the top issue. And we put it into a formula that we have to help you kind of assess the return on investment based on whether that investment be dollars or just information or resources. You can see maintenance of city streets is the issue that really resounds most positively with residents. They place the highest priority on it. It's also by far the lowest rated service. And that's really what you'll tend to make a difference in people's overall perceptions when you invest in areas or educate people about issues where they place a lot of importance, but you're not doing as well at delivering the services. The next area, that kind of high priority, are all fairly equal, and you can see codes, transit, police services, and parks and recreation all fall into that next tier, obviously along with traffic flow. And then we also have some charts and graphs in the report that if you're not, this is for people who like numbers and lists. I guess if you're left-brained, if you're a right-brained person and you like pictures, this is the same information. The only difference is you start in the bottom right quadrant. Those kind of tells you what the top priorities are. So the things that are to the farthest, to the farthest right and to the bottom, the further right they are, the more important they are. Further to the left, the less important they are. And if they're below that kind of horizontal line, indicates that the ratings tend to be lower. So in this case, you see maintenance of streets is over to the far right. It's also the farthest to the bottom, which indicates it's the top issue. And then you kind of work your way around counterclockwise. Just kind of summarizing the top priorities, I won't do all the analysis that we did in the report, but you can see maintenance of streets was the top issue overall. Within some of the other categories that we assessed on maintenance, it was the maintenance of streets and neighborhood streets. Sometimes it's other aspects of maintenance, but clearly it's a street-related issue here. Within parks and recreation, it was your walking and biking trails, and also, interestingly, the availability of information. that will probably have a positive impact. Just letting people know what you have available is probably going to make a difference. And the fact that you have a lot of 3 ratings reinforces that finding when we looked at the data and did more analysis with it. And then finally, on code enforcement, enforcing the mowing and trimming of grass and the cleanup of debris on private property will also be the area within code enforcement to emphasize over the next year or 2. So just to summarize, this is the same chart I put up at the beginning of the presentation. I want to congratulate the city for basically moving forward during a period when our nation really is having some challenges and really causing residents to feel so passionately about the direction the city's moving in. It's very, very rare to have 43% of your residents give you a rating of 5 out of 5 with the direction that you're moving, and have 83% altogether feel that you're moving in the right direction. You got to be doing something right. So the indicators here really suggest that this city's on the right course. You've sustained the overall ratings compared to a year ago, but I would anticipate that you'll see improvement as you start complete many of the projects that are underway. You'll probably see the ratings for individual areas improve in the next couple of years. So with that, it's a pleasure to be here. I don't know if anyone has any questions, but I'd be happy to answer them if you do.
Questions from the council?
When was this poll in the field? When did
This survey was done in June, the month of June.
Well, could you make sure that you do them in the future at any time that we're in the finals of the NBA championship?
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be a big help on the image side, at least. That's got to, and satisfaction and all those things. Got to be. That's it. I've never seen it higher personally than I saw it during the playoffs and the championship. Everybody was caught up in that, and it's bound to reflect itself some in these.
And I'd say that probably affects your image and some of the other questions. The fact that you saw overall satisfaction with city services improve and things like that. We've done this for other cities that have done well and been in championships, and they've seen the opposite impact, because what happens is suddenly you have a lot of demands for city services because of what's going on. So they might feel better about living in Boston or wherever the championship is taking place, but then they expect more, right?
Callous to playing for championships. Oklahoma City never had the chance before until this year.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you know the factors that entered into the response related to a good place to retire?
There's a number of factors there, and again, for this survey, we don't break it down, but we have done work for other communities to better understand those. It can be everything from the availability of medical facilities and the quality of medical facilities. It can be issues related to transportation for elderly. It can have to do with the housing prices and the affordability of the market for people. So, there are many factors that go into that. Those are just a few, but I know the medical availability, affordability of housing, and the availability of transportation, those tend to be 3 of the dominant issues that tend to affect that.
And the issue about traffic flow, I think overall the traffic has improved, the flow of traffic, especially since we've opened up the new I-40. And perhaps that's more in the area of the downtown with all the construction that's going on. But I was surprised by that not being a little bit higher. I would like to make this general comment. I agree that this is a very favorable report, but for us to set back and think, oh, we've accomplished all we need to, I think is potentially problematic, and I think we've just got more opportunities to continue to improve upon our city and never get complacent with respect to these types of responses.
Councilman Greenwell, in regard to your comment about the ease of traffic flow, when you've got as much under construction, not only downtown but around the city as we've got, people are going to complain about getting around. We've got lanes shut down where there might have been 4 lanes, it's down to 2 and so forth. I'm sure that has a lot to do with it.
Thank you very much for your very good report, and we look forward to seeing you in the future with similar reports and hopefully show the grades going up and not falling complacent as Councilman Greenwell has challenged us not to.
Thank you
very much.